All right, welcome to today's VETSELITE daily vlog, and today I'm going to talk about the importance of the foot, and not just strength movements, but in speed, basically in speed and jumping. And the thing is that they're very different, and having a distinction between the two and making sure that there's an understanding that there is a difference between the two, and kind of the, I guess, benefits and consequences for utilizing certain, mind, muscle connection for each technique. You have to understand those things in order to get the most out of whatever you're doing. So first, I'm going to go into detail on, from what I know, I'm still learning, but from what I know about the foot complex when it comes to sprinting and jumping and change of direction, agility, that kind of thing. So basically, speed and jumping really is a combination of the amount of force that you put into the ground when you're interacting with the ground and how long you interact with the ground. That's the impulse, right? So the amount of impulse that you have when you strike the ground, whether you're running, accelerating, jumping, for the most part, most upper level, athletes have very similar impulses. Like, my impulse into the ground would be very similar to that of Usain Bolt, right? I'm not saying I'm as fast as Usain Bolt, but the impulse, which is force times time. So basically, like, our force times time would equal the same thing, but how you get that total is what determines the end result. You know what I mean? That determines how fast you really are, how, high you can jump. So basically, there's force contribution and there's, velocity contributions to that. So speed really is how fast you can apply large forces to the ground. And the less time you spend on the ground with the higher forces that you can apply, the faster that you are. So sprinters that are elite, world-class sprinters, their contact times are less than a tenth of a second. So Usain Bolt can apply all of his force to the ground and get his foot off the ground in, I believe it's 0.06 seconds. So that's how fast he gets off the ground. And the force that he applies within that time frame equals the same as what mine would be, with my contact time probably being like somewhere in the high, teens to 0.2. You know what I mean, when I'm running. So I'd probably be around 0.16 to 0.19 applying X amount of force that would equal the same impulse. So the reason he's so fast is he can strike the ground with such efficiency. So that force he's striking, he's off the ground. So as I'm still trying to get my foot applying the force and then off the ground, Usain Bolt is already transitioning in flight phase to his next step. So understanding how important the role of the ankle and foot complex are really comes down to that principle. So if you lack strength or you lack stability in the foot, or your ankle complex isn't stiff enough to basically apply force to the ground without deforming, so that you can get on and off the ground quicker, your time is going to be slower. And basically the way you expose yourself first to getting those adaptations is through maximal sprinting. The more you maximal sprint, and truly maximal sprint, not the more that you run, the more that you maximally sprint, the more you'll begin to get those adaptations. Then secondary to that is things that, recruit high fast twitch motor units. So you're talking about plyometrics here, whether it's dead jumps, whether it's high hurdle hops, whether it's bounds, those type of things recruit, the stretch shortening cycle and require that you get on and off the ground fast to strengthen that ankle complex. And the same goes for jumping, now when I say jumping, I'm really talking about like high jump and long jump. Granted, like, the techniques on those are very specific, but the same kind of principles apply where, the faster that you can apply the force to the ground, the more impulse you can get. And when you're talking about those two type of situations, the ground contact time will be a little longer just because there's a higher force requirement since it's one effort. Now, if you're talking about standing vertical jump, whether it's static or counter movement, now that does have a lot of interaction with the foot and how you utilize your big toe. in that sense. But that doesn't have to do as much with that ankle complex stiffness. That really comes from running, change of direction, and agility, where you really need that, because the stiffer and stronger that you can absorb force and then apply force, so getting in and out of that eccentric, isometric, concentric, the better you are going to be at sprinting. The faster you will be, the faster you'll get in and out of cuts, the faster that you can make these type of change of directions happen in sport. There's obviously a lot more to that. If you've been kind of following my Instagram, you'll see, you kind of see I've been doing these feet strengthening drills, these feet and ankle drills, because that's what I'm trying to target. I'm trying to get the ability of the body or the ankle complex to be able to not just, to be able to withstand the extreme forces that happen in sprinting. So that's very, very basic overview. If you're interested in more detail on that, definitely DM me. I'll give you all the information I know on it. Now, for lifting, it's a little bit different. With lifting, it's really called rooting, and I'm strictly talking about the power lifts here. Olympic weightlifting has probably some similar concepts, but they're not exactly the same. But when you're talking about the power lifts, deadlift, squat, and even bench, how you root into the ground is essential to, basically, it's a bottom-up approach. It's essential to how the rest of the lift will go. So if you're not rooting your feet into the ground, and what I mean by rooting is if you're not grabbing the ground. So basically, if you pretend that these are my toes, right? And on the bottoms is the bottom of your foot. Basically, there's fascia, which is it's basically it's thin, outside layer of muscle tissue that really is connective tissue that connects the tendons. And then those tendons run all the way up, through your Achilles tendon, all the way up into your hamstrings, then all the way up into your glutes. And that chain runs through the whole, all posterior. So basically that whole chain starts at the big toe. So if this is my foot, this is the big toe, right? So when you turn this on, that activates the whole chain all the way up to the glute. So what happens is once you turn that on, now you have you've turned on your glutes to have the correct firing pattern so that they will activate first in hip extension. So when you extend the hips, what happens is you can have misfiring patterns where you either fire with your back, with your back first to your hamstring, then to your glutes, or your hamstring back, then to glutes. It has to be glute, hamstring, lower back. And basically the way that you can get that activation is by rooting yourself in the ground and squeezing the ground and getting that big toe activated. The thing is with the foot in this situation, in these lift situations, is there's going to be a little bit of supination there because you're going to try to grab all of the ground down like that. The way that the foot moves, whether it's supinating or whether it's pronating, whether you're trying to drive and get basically internal hip rotation or external hip rotation, that difference really comes into play when you're talking about sprinting, change of direction, movement, and then talking about lifting. With this, you're grabbing ground here, so you're almost in a supinated position. But basically, this rooting is a strategy that will lead you all the way up to bracing. You know what I mean? So without this, without the application of your toes in the ground, you'll miss out on the opportunity to turn your glutes on, but what you'll also miss out on is an opportunity to brace all the way up through the trunk, because basically the rib cage and the pelvis are very intertwined. There's all of your core muscles, not just the abs, but the transverse abdominis and the obliques, they attach on the rib cage to the pelvis, so they're linked directly. So if the pelvis isn't activated the right way with you turning on your glutes, then you're missing out on that chain. The chain goes all the way up, and if you don't get a good brace here, and especially here, a brace is more about the oblique activation, not about the abdominals. So it's really about here. If you don't get that brace right, then you're missing out on tension that you can develop in your own body, which will then affect your lift. So if you're really interested in more about this, definitely DM me. I'll talk to you about it, and then you'll see how this has a carryover into all my programs. So thanks. Have a good night.